Ambassador Veltar had served the Galactic Council for over 2 centuries, but she had never received a summons like this one. The crimson emergency beacon pulsed on her desk, its harsh light casting strange shadows across the diplomatic quarters of Station Alpha 7. When she activated the message, High Chancellor Mordun's image flickered to life, his usually composed features twisted with something that looked remarkably like terror. All council representatives are to report to Emergency Session Chamber 1 immediately, Mordun announced, his voice carrying an unusual tremor. We have a code black situation developing in the Zirian sector. Veltar's blood ran cold. Code black meant the complete annihilation of an inhabited system. It meant the Devourers had returned. The Emergency Session Chamber buzzed with panicked conversations in a dozen different languages. Representatives from across the galaxy huddled in nervous clusters, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic vibrations. Veltar took her designated seat among the Altarian delegation, noting how even the normally stoic crystalline collective seemed agitated, their mineral bodies reflecting light in rapid, anxious patterns. High Chancellor Mordun's massive frame dominated the central platform as he called for order. The Kethmori leader stood nearly 4 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. When the room finally quieted, his words fell like stones into still water. 17 hours ago, the Zirian system went dark, he began, his mandibles clicking nervously. All communication ceased simultaneously across 12 inhabited worlds. Our long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures consistent with Devourer technology. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The Devourers were supposed to be extinct, wiped out in the Great Cleansing Wars 5,000 years ago. They were the stuff of nightmares now, ancient horrors that parents used to frighten misbehaving children. The idea that they had returned was almost too terrible to process. How many? Asked Representative Quindar of the Stellar Federation, her tentacles writhing with anxiety. Preliminary estimates suggest a fleet of over 10,000 vessels, Mordun replied. They're moving through hyperspace toward the core systems. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the Centauri cluster within 6 standard cycles. The chamber erupted in chaos. 6 cycles meant that billions of beings across dozens of worlds would be consumed, their life essence drained to fuel the Devourers' horrific war machines. The Galactic Defense Fleet was formidable, but it had been designed to handle conventional threats. The Devourers were something else entirely, ancient technological horrors that viewed all biological life as nothing more than fuel for their endless hunger. What of the Defense Fleet? Called out Senator Hicksmoth of the Regellian Assembly. Already mobilizing, Mordun confirmed. But our military advisors estimate we can field perhaps 8,000 ships within the required timeframe. Even with full council support, we'll be outnumbered and outgunned. He paused, his compound eyes scanning the chamber. Which brings us to the purpose of this emergency session. The Chancellor activated a holographic display, showing a small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Most of the representatives recognized it immediately: Earth, the homeworld of the galaxy's newest and most enigmatic member species. The humans had been granted council membership only 50 years ago, after their remarkably rapid development of faster-than-light travel. They remained something of a curiosity to the older civilizations, young and brash and utterly unlike any species the galaxy had encountered before. The human government has submitted a formal proposal, Mordun continued. They're volunteering to spearhead the defense against the Devourer fleet. The chamber fell silent. Then, slowly, a few representatives began to laugh. The idea was absurd. Humans had barely mastered interstellar travel, let alone warfare on a galactic scale. Their entire civilization was confined to a single star system, with only a few mining colonies and research stations beyond their home planet. What could they possibly contribute to a battle against the most feared enemy in galactic history? With all due respect to our human colleagues, said Admiral Theklar of the Tauri Military Confederacy, but what exactly are they proposing? Their defense force consists of perhaps 200 vessels, most of them light scouts and cargo haulers. They've never engaged in large-scale warfare, and their technology is generations behind Council standards. Representative Sarah Chen of the Human Colonial Administration rose from her seat. She was typical of her species, small, bipedal, with pale skin and dark hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her appearance was deceptively fragile, but Veltar had learned not to underestimate humans based on their physical characteristics. They possessed an intensity that was both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Admiral Theklar raises valid points about our technological capabilities, Chen acknowledged, her voice carrying an edge that made several representatives unconsciously step back. However, I think you might be surprised by what we're prepared to contribute. She activated her own holographic display, showing detailed schematics that made even the most advanced council engineers gasp in shock. The designs were unlike anything they had ever seen. Where galactic technology favored elegant curves and harmonious integration with natural forces, these human creations were angular, brutal, and efficient. Their ships looked less like vessels and more like weapons that happened to have life support systems attached. Every line spoke of violence, of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. These are preliminary designs for our Dreadnought-class vessels, Chen explained, her tone matter-of-fact. We can have 50 constructed and operational within 4 cycles. Each ship carries enough firepower to level a small moon, and they're specifically designed for engagement with technologically superior opponents. Impossible, scoffed engineer Molvex of the Archimedean hierarchy. The power requirements alone would drain a star. And the materials, some of these alloys don't even exist in our periodic charts. Chen smiled, and Veltar felt a chill run through her bioluminescent organs. There was something predatory in that expression, something that spoke to genetic memories of being hunted by creatures with too many teeth. Engineer Molvex, I think you'll find that humans have a rather unique approach to resource acquisition and technological development. We've been at war with ourselves for our entire recorded history. Every advance in medicine, science, and engineering has been driven by our need to kill each other more efficiently. What you call impossible, we call Tuesday. The silence that followed was profound. Most galactic civilizations had evolved beyond large-scale conflict millions of years ago. War was considered a primitive, wasteful activity practiced only by young species that hadn't yet learned the value of cooperation. The idea that an entire civilization could be shaped by constant warfare was deeply disturbing to most council members. You're talking about genocide machines, whispered Representative Yilandra of the Pacifist Coalition. Vessels designed purely for destruction. Yes, Chen replied without hesitation. Because sometimes, genocide machines are exactly what you need to fight genocide machines. She gestured to the Devourer threat analysis displayed on the main screen. The enemy we face doesn't negotiate. It doesn't seek resources or territory. It exists solely to consume life itself. You can't reason with it, you can't bargain with it, and you can't run from it fast enough. The only way to stop it is to destroy it completely. Admiral ZEK-THYSS of the Council Defense Force had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he leaned forward in his seat. The old cetacean had commanded fleets in dozens of conflicts, and his tactical mind was already processing the implications of what the human was proposing. These designs, he said slowly, they're not just weapons platforms. They're mobile fortresses. Each ship could hold its own against a council battle group. He paused, his bioluminescent patches flickering in complex patterns. How many crew would each vessel require? Crew? Chen looked genuinely confused for a moment. Oh, I see the misunderstanding. These ships don't carry crews in the traditional sense. They carry champions. Champions? Veltar found herself speaking before she realized it. What do you mean by champions? Chen's smile grew wider, and several representatives instinctively moved back from her position at the podium. Admiral ZEK-THYSS, you've studied Earth's history as part of our council admission review, correct? The old admiral nodded, though his expression was troubled. Then, you know that humans have always selected their finest warriors for the most dangerous missions. We call them champions, individuals who have proven themselves capable of achieving the impossible through sheer determination and skill. Each dreadnought will carry 1,000 of our very best. 1,000 soldiers to crew a vessel designed for 50,000, mused Theklar. That seems not soldiers, Chen interrupted, and her voice carried a tone that made the temperature in the chamber seem to drop several degrees. Champions. There's a difference. Soldiers follow orders and execute tactics. Champions make the impossible happen because someone needs to. High Chancellor Mordun raised one massive claw for attention. Representative Chen, while we appreciate Earth's willingness to contribute to the defense effort, I'm not certain that 50 ships, however well designed, will be sufficient to turn the tide against 10,000 Devourer vessels. 50 ships would just be the first wave, Chen replied. If given full Council support and access to industrial resources in the outer systems, we can field 500 dreadnoughts within 6 cycles. Each one crewed by champions who have spent their entire lives preparing for exactly this kind of fight. The chamber erupted in debate once again. The numbers were staggering: 500 vessels carrying 500,000 human warriors. It would represent the largest military mobilization in galactic history, dwarfing even the Great Cleansing Wars. But, could such a force actually stand against the Devourers? Admiral Zek THYSS was studying the tactical displays with growing fascination. Representative Chen, these power output figures, they suggest your vessels would be capable of sustained engagement against multiple Devourer dreadnoughts. How is that possible with such primitive technology? Admiral, you're making the same mistake that most civilizations make when they encounter humanity for the first time, Chen explained, her tone taking on an almost professorial quality. You assume that advanced technology equals superior capability. But, there's something to be said for brute force application of simple principles. She highlighted several sections of the ship schematics. These vessels aren't elegant. They're not efficient by Council standards. They're designed on a single principle: to keep fighting until either the enemy is dead or we are. Every system has 3 backups. Every weapon has manual override capabilities. Every critical function can be operated by a single determined individual if necessary. But, surely your champions can't be that superior to trained galactic military personnel, protested General Hectoon of the Warrior Caste Alliance. Combat effectiveness is largely determined by experience and technology, both of which favor Council forces. Chen was quiet for a long moment, and, when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the chamber. General, let me tell you about human champions. Every one of them has been selected from a population of billions based on a single criterion: their absolute refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. They're individuals who have looked death in the face and laughed. They've achieved victories that should have been impossible and accomplished missions that killed everyone else who tried them. She paused, letting her words sink in. More importantly, they're volunteers. Not conscripts, not patriots following orders, but individuals who stepped forward when we asked who was willing to fight monsters in the dark. 500,000 humans said yes without hesitation, knowing that they would likely die in the attempt. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Even the background hum of the station's life support system seemed muted. That's what we're offering you, Chen continued. Not just ships or weapons or tactics, but champions who have never learned how to surrender. Humans who will keep fighting long after any rational being would retreat or seek negotiation. Warriors who will follow the enemy into whatever hell they came from and make sure they never come back. High Chancellor Mordun's mandibles clicked nervously as he processed this information. The proposal would need to be put to a full Council vote, of course. And there would be considerable resource allocation issues to resolve. Of course, Chen agreed. But, I would urge the Council to consider this carefully. The Devourers destroyed the Zirian system in a matter of hours. 12 worlds, each with populations in the billions, simply ceased to exist. They're not going to stop, and they're not going to slow down. Traditional defensive strategies will only delay the inevitable. She gestured to the tactical displays again. Earth is offering you the one thing that has never failed us in 10,000 years of warfare: champions who refuse to lose. We can't promise that all of them will come home. We can't even promise that any of them will. But, we can promise that if the Devourers want to consume this galaxy, they're going to have to go through us first. Representative Veltar found herself studying the human woman with new eyes. There was something deeply unsettling about Chen's casual acceptance of massive casualties, but there was also something inspiring about her absolute confidence. Humans, she realized, didn't just accept war as a possibility, they embraced it as an inevitability and prepared accordingly. The vote will be held in 6 standard hours, Mordun announced. All representatives are advised to consult with their home governments before casting their ballots. This session is adjourned. As the various delegates filed out of the chamber, Veltar noticed that many of them were giving the human representative a wide berth. Chen seemed utterly unperturbed by their obvious discomfort, gathering her data files with the same methodical efficiency she had displayed throughout the session. Admiral ZTHYSS approached the human as she prepared to leave. Representative Chen, may I ask you a personal question? Of course, Admiral. Do you truly believe that your champions can defeat an enemy that has consumed entire civilizations? Chen looked up at the massive cetacean, her dark eyes reflecting none of the uncertainty that filled the chamber around them. Admiral, humans have been fighting impossible odds since we first crawled out of our caves and decided that the monsters in the dark needed to be taught respect. We've never met an enemy that couldn't be killed if you were willing to pay the price to kill it. She smiled again, that predatory expression that seemed to tap into primal fears buried deep in genetic memory. And we've always been willing to pay that price. As the human departed, Admiral ZTHYSS found himself staring at the tactical displays she had left behind. 50 massive dreadnoughts crewed by 1,000 champions each. 500 ships carrying 500,000 warriors who had never learned how to surrender. For the first time since the crisis began, the old admiral felt something he hadn't expected to feel again. He felt hope. But underneath that hope was something else, something that would trouble his dreams for years to come. As he studied those brutal, efficient weapon platforms, Admiral ZTHYSS began to understand why so many ancient civilizations had left warnings about the children of Sol. The galaxy was about to witness what humans were truly capable of when they went to war. And, deep in his heart, the Admiral suspected that the Devourers might not be the only ones who should be afraid. The council vote had been closer than expected, 2,847 in favor, 2,156 against, with 847 abstentions. But it had been enough. Within hours of the decision, the largest industrial mobilization in galactic history had begun. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Forge Station Prometheus, watching as the first dreadnought took shape in the massive construction bay below. The vessel was already larger than most Council battleships, and it was only half complete. Around it, thousands of automated construction drones swarmed like metallic insects, guided by human supervisors who worked in shifts that would have killed most galactic species. Impressive, isn't it? Elena turned to see Commander Marcus Shaw approaching, his Spartan-class combat armor making him look more like a walking weapon than a human being. Shaw commanded the 7th Champion Regiment, and his presence on the construction station was both inspiring and slightly terrifying to the alien observers. The engineering specs are fascinating, Elena admitted, returning her attention to the construction below. I've never seen anything like the power coupling systems they're using. It's as if they designed the ship around the weapons rather than the other way around. That's exactly what we did, Shaw confirmed, moving to stand beside her at the observation window. Every system on that ship exists to serve one purpose, to keep our champions in the fight as long as possible. Everything else is secondary. Below them, the massive frame of the dreadnought gleamed under the construction lights. The ship's hull was unlike anything in the Galactic Fleet, angular and brutal, covered in sensor arrays and weapon mounts that gave it the appearance of a predator lying in wait. Along its length, smaller craft could be seen taking shape: drop pods, boarding vessels, and support fighters that look more like guided missiles than traditional spacecraft. The council representatives are having second thoughts, Elena mentioned, pulling up a data pad showing the latest diplomatic communications. Some of them are starting to wonder if giving humanity access to this level of military technology was a wise decision. Shaw's expression didn't change, but Elena could see something cold flicker in his eyes. They're welcome to reconsider their decision. Of course, they'll have to explain to the populations of the inner systems why they chose politics over survival when the Devourers arrive. A new voice joined the conversation. The concern is understandable, though perhaps misplaced. Elena and Shaw turned to see Admiral ZEK-THYSS approaching, his massive form moving with surprising grace despite the artificial gravity that was calibrated for human physiology rather than cetacean needs. The old admiral had been spending considerable time observing the construction process, and his presence had become a familiar sight on the station. "Admiral," Shaw acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I trust your inspection tour has been informative?" "More than I anticipated," ZEK-THYSS admitted, his bioluminescent patches pulsing in patterns that Elena's translation software indicated represented deep thought. "I've had the opportunity to observe your champion selection process. It's unprecedented." Elena raised an eyebrow. The champion selection had been conducted in complete secrecy, with human military officials refusing to allow any galactic observers access to the testing facilities. The fact that Admiral ZEK-THYSS had been granted permission was significant. "What did you think?" Shaw asked, and Elena was surprised to hear genuine curiosity in his voice. "I think," the Admiral said carefully, "that the galaxy has never truly understood what humanity represents." He activated his own display, showing footage from the selection trials that made Elena's blood run cold. The images showed humans enduring tests that would have been considered torture by most civilized standards. Combat scenarios where failure meant actual death. Psychological evaluations that broke the minds of trained psychologists who administered them. Physical trials that pushed human biology far beyond its theoretical limits. This candidate, ZEK-THYSS, highlighted a recording of a young woman fighting her way through what appeared to be a maze filled with lethal obstacles, failed her mission objective. Her target was to reach the extraction point within 30 minutes. She took 37 minutes. So she failed? Elena asked, confused by the Admiral's tone. "She failed," Shaw confirmed, after fighting her way through 17 minutes of additional obstacles because she refused to leave 3 wounded teammates behind. She carried 2 of them to safety and died trying to save the 3rd. "And she was selected as a champion," ZEK-THYSS added, his voice carrying a tone of amazement. "Not despite her failure, but because of how she failed." The evaluators determined that her refusal to abandon her comrades represented the exact kind of thinking they wanted in their warriors. Elena stared at the display, watching as the woman, barely out of her teens, continued fighting even as her life signs flatlined. "That's not military thinking. That's something else entirely. That's humanity," Shaw said simply. "We don't just train soldiers. We forge champions by putting people in impossible situations and seeing who finds a way to win anyway. The ones who succeed become our elite forces. The ones who fail gloriously become our legends." Admiral ZEK-THYSS manipulated the display to show another selection trial. This one featured a man in his 40s methodically working his way through what appeared to be a complex engineering problem while under constant attack from automated defense systems. "Engineer 3rd Class Robert Chen," the Admiral narrated. "Former mining equipment specialist, no formal military training. He volunteered for champion selection after his entire mining colony was destroyed in a devourer simulation exercise." Elena watched as the man continued his work even as energy blasts burned sections of his body. His hands never stopped moving, never hesitated, even when it was clear that he was dying from his injuries. The problem he was solving was unsolvable, Shaw explained. The testing algorithm was designed to be impossible to crack within the time limit. Chen solved it anyway by modifying the testing equipment itself while under fire. Took him 3 hours and cost him his left arm and most of his skin. He died 20 minutes after completing the task, ZEK-THYSS added. His last words were reportedly, "Did I pass?" "And?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Posthumous acceptance into the Champion Corps," Shaw confirmed. His tactical thinking and engineering modifications are now standard curriculum in our advanced training programs. He saved 17,000 lives with his solution, even though he didn't live to see it implemented. The display shifted to show a massive training facility where thousands of humans were engaged in exercises that defied belief. Elena watched as champions sparred against combat robots that moved faster than her eyes could track, solved tactical problems while being subjected to sensory overloads that would incapacitate most species, and demonstrated levels of physical and mental endurance that challenged the known limits of biological possibility. How many candidates do you typically lose during selection? Admiral ZEC-THYSS asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. About 40%, Shaw replied without emotion. Another 30% are permanently disabled. We only accept candidates who understand that they're likely to die during the training process. That's barbaric, Elena whispered, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. That's necessary, Shaw corrected. The champions we're sending against the Devourers aren't just soldiers. They're individuals who have already proven that they'll keep fighting even when victory is impossible. Death doesn't stop them. Pain doesn't stop them. The only thing that stops them is mission completion. Admiral ZEC-THYSS was quiet for a long moment, studying the training footage with the eye of a military professional who had seen combat across dozens of star systems. In all my years of service, he said eventually, I've never encountered warriors like these. The closest comparison would be the Berserker clans of Arcturus Prime, but even they maintain some concept of tactical retreat. Humans don't retreat, Shaw said matter-of-factly. We might fall back to regroup, we might withdraw to protect civilians, but we don't retreat. It's not part of our psychological makeup. When we commit to a fight, we're committed until one side or the other is completely destroyed. Elena was studying the construction bay again, watching as weapons that could shatter planets were carefully installed into the growing dreadnought. The council representatives are right to be concerned. Ships like this, crewed by warriors like these, you're not just building a military force. You're building something that could threaten the entire galactic order. Shaw turned to look at her, and Elena was struck by the complete absence of malice in his expression. There was no anger, no aggression, just a calm certainty that was somehow more frightening than any threat. Dr. Vasquez, humanity has been a member of the Galactic Council for 50 years. In that time, have we ever threatened another species? Have we ever demanded territory or resources that belong to others? Have we ever used our military capabilities to coerce or intimidate our neighbors? No, Elena admitted. But, you've never had capabilities like these before. We've had worse, Shaw said quietly. On Earth, we have weapons that could sterilize the entire planet in a matter of hours. We've had them for centuries. We've never used them against each other, even during our worst conflicts. Do you know why? Elena shook her head. Because the same thing that makes us terrifying enemies also makes us trustworthy allies. When we give our word, we keep it. When we make a commitment, we honor it. When we say we'll protect something, we protect it until we die. Shaw gestured toward the dreadnought below. Every champion on that ship has sworn an oath to defend the innocent and preserve life throughout the galaxy. They'll die before they break that oath. Admiral ZEC-THYSS was nodding slowly. I've been reviewing your military history as part of my tactical assessment. Humans have fought wars against impossible odds before. The siege of Stalingrad, the Battle of Thermopylae, the defense of Earth's moon during the Colonial Rebellion. In every case, human forces continued fighting long after any rational analysis would have predicted defeat. What happened in those battles? Elena asked. We won, Shaw said simply. Not always immediately, and not without cost, but we won. Because winning isn't about having the best odds or the most advanced technology. It's about being willing to pay whatever price victory requires. The construction bay suddenly erupted in activity as the first dreadnought's main engine came online for testing. The massive vessel shuddered slightly as power coursed through systems designed to channel more energy than some stars produced. Elena could feel the vibration through the station's hull, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in her bones. Magnificent, Admiral ZEC-THYSS breathed, his bioluminescent patches flashing in patterns Elena's translator couldn't parse. I've never seen anything like it. You will, Shaw promised. 49 more just like it, each one carrying 1,000 champions who have spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. The Devourers won't know what hit them. Elena was studying the tactical displays that showed the projected deployment patterns for the human fleet. The strategy was unlike anything in the Galactic military handbooks. Instead of forming defensive lines or establishing patrol routes, the dreadnoughts would operate as independent hunter-killer groups, seeking out devourer forces and engaging them directly. This deployment strategy, she observed, it's incredibly aggressive. You're not planning to defend specific systems or establish fallback positions. You're going to hunt them. That's exactly what we're going to do, Shaw confirmed. The devourers have been the hunters for too long. Time to remind them what it feels like to be prey. Admiral ZEC-THYSS was reviewing the same tactical data, his experienced eye analyzing the implications of the human strategy. This approach carries enormous risks. If any of your dreadnoughts are destroyed, you lose not just the ship but 1,000 irreplaceable champions. Every champion understands the risks, Shaw replied. They also understand that this is bigger than any individual battle or any individual life. The devourers aren't just threatening a few star systems, they're threatening the continued existence of biological life in this galaxy. Elena felt a chill as she realized the full implications of what Shaw was saying. You're not just planning to fight them. You're planning to exterminate them. Completely, Shaw confirmed without hesitation. The devourers can't be reasoned with, they can't be contained, and they can't be allowed to continue existing. They're a cancer that consumes everything it touches. The only solution is complete surgical removal. And, if that's impossible? Elena asked. What if they're too powerful, or too numerous, or too well defended? Shaw was quiet for a moment, and, when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. Then, our champions will follow them back to whatever nightmare dimension they came from and make sure they never return. That's what champions do, Dr. Vasquez. We fight impossible battles and win them anyway. Admiral ZEC-THYSS was studying the human commander with an expression that Elena couldn't quite read. Commander Shaw, I have one final question, if I may. Of course, Admiral. What happens after? Assuming your champions are successful in eliminating the devourer threat, what becomes of a military force capable of destroying entire star systems? Shaw smiled, and Elena was surprised to see genuine warmth in the expression. The same thing that's always happened to human military forces after a war, Admiral. They go home. They become teachers, farmers, engineers, parents. They build things instead of destroying them. Because that's the other thing about champions, they fight so that others don't have to. Elena found herself looking at the dreadnought with new eyes. It was still a weapon of terrifying power, still crewed by warriors who had been forged in the crucible of impossible trials. But it was also something else, a shield held by people who understood that some things were worth dying to protect. How long until the fleet is ready? She asked. For more cycles, Shaw replied, checking his chronometer. The last dreadnought comes online in 96 hours. Champion training completes in 72. Final systems integration in 12. Admiral ZEC-THYSS was already making calculations in his head. The devourers will reach the outer defensive perimeter in approximately 5 cycles. That gives you less than 24 hours to deploy and establish engagement positions. More than enough time, Shaw assured him. Human champions don't need long preparation periods or complex logistical support. They travel light and hit hard. Once they're in position, the galaxy will see what happens when humanity goes to war. Elena shivered despite the station's warm atmosphere. Below them, the first of humanity's dreadnoughts gleamed under the construction lights, its brutal beauty promising violence on a scale the galaxy had never witnessed. Soon, very soon, the children of Sol would march to battle. And the cosmos would learn why even the stars themselves wept when humans went to war. Captain Sarah Reaper Morrison stood on the command deck of the UES Relentless, watching as the first Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metallic locusts. The enemy ships were massive, kilometer-long monstrosities that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their hulls pulsing with the sickly green energy that powered their consumption drives. Contact bearing 047 Mark 6, reported her tactical officer, Champion First Class David Park. His voice was steady despite the fact that they were looking at nearly 300 enemy vessels, each one larger than their dreadnought. Range, 40,000 kilometers and closing.
Signal the fleet, Morrison commanded. All ships, weapons free. Remember, people, we're not here to trade paint with these things. We're here to introduce them to the concept of human diplomacy. Around the Relentless, 49 other dreadnoughts powered up their weapon systems. Each ship carried enough firepower to shatter a moon, and they were all focused on the approaching Devourer fleet with the single-minded intensity that had made humanity the galaxy's premier warriors. Morrison had earned her callsign during the Titan Rebellion, when she'd single-handedly held a mining platform against 3 full companies of separatist Marines for 6 hours while evacuation ships removed civilian personnel. She'd killed 47 enemy soldiers and destroyed 2 assault shuttles with nothing but a rifle and an unbreakable will to protect the innocent. Now, she commanded 1,000 champions who shared that same absolute refusal to accept defeat. Admiral ZEC-THYSS is requesting a calm channel, reported communications officer Janet Wu from her station near the back of the command deck. Put him through, Morrison replied, never taking her eyes off the tactical display. Admiral ZEC-THYSS's image flickered to life on the main screen, transmitted from his flagship 30 light-years away where the Council Defense Fleet was establishing secondary positions. The old cetacean looked haggard, his bioluminescent patches dim with exhaustion. Captain Morrison, the Council is monitoring your engagement from long-range sensors. I must advise extreme caution. Our intelligence suggests that Devourer vessels are equipped with technology that can drain life force directly from biological entities. Morrison smiled, and several of her bridge crew unconsciously stepped back from her position. Admiral, with all due respect, the Devourers are about to discover that draining life from humans is a lot more complicated than they might expect. We're a stubborn species. Captain, I must stress that these are not conventional opponents. Every simulation we've run suggests that direct engagement with Devourer forces results in complete annihilation of biological crews within minutes of contact. Admiral, Morrison replied, her voice carrying the calm certainty that had made her a legend among human military circles, we appreciate your concern. But, humans have been fighting things that were supposed to kill us instantly for our entire evolutionary history. We're very good at not dying when we're supposed to. Before ZEC-THYSS could respond, the Devourer fleet suddenly accelerated, their ships moving with impossible speed toward the human formation. Energy readings spiked across the entire sensor grid as the enemy vessels began charging their consumption weapons. Here they come, Park announced, his fingers dancing across the tactical controls. Multiple energy signatures building across their entire fleet. Power levels are off the charts. Morrison activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to engage the enemy that has consumed 17 star systems and billions of lives. They expect us to die quietly, like every other species they've encountered. She paused, letting her words sink in. They're about to learn that humans don't die quietly. We die screaming defiance and taking as many of the bastards with us as possible. Champions of the Relentless, show them what we're made of. The response from her crew was immediate and terrifying. 1,000 voices roared in unison, a battle cry that seemed to make the ship itself tremble with anticipation. It was a sound that spoke to genetic memories buried deep in the human psyche, the sound of predators announcing their presence to prey. The first Devourer energy beams lashed out across space, massive columns of green fire that should have vaporized anything they touched. But, the human dreadnoughts didn't vaporize. Their shields flared with energies that seemed to absorb and redirect the attack, exotic defensive fields based on principles that the Council's best scientists were still trying to understand. Shields holding at 87%, reported Chief Engineer Lisa Rodriguez from her position at the damage control station. Those energy drains are nasty, but our bio-isolation systems are keeping them from affecting the crew. Morrison grinned fiercely. Humans had always been paranoid about biological weapons and energy-based life drain attacks. Their ships were designed with multiple redundant systems specifically intended to protect the crew from exactly the kind of assault the Devourers were launching. Return fire, she commanded. All weapons, full spread. Show them what human engineering can do. The Relentless unleashed its full arsenal in a barrage that lit up space like a newborn star. Plasma cannons that fired miniature suns.
railguns that accelerated projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Missile systems that launched self-guiding warheads equipped with artificial intelligences programmed for one purpose: to find enemy targets and destroy them completely. The human attack struck the leading Devourer vessels with devastating effect. Ships that had survived the destruction of entire star systems suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by weapons that seemed to ignore their defensive systems entirely. Hull plating that could withstand stellar radiation cracked under the impact of human kinetic rounds. Energy shields that had deflected the combined firepower of galactic defense fleets collapsed under the concentrated fury of human plasma arrays. Direct hits across the board, Park reported, his voice carrying a note of amazement. We're punching right through their defenses. 3 enemy vessels are showing critical damage, and 1 is breaking up completely. Morrison watched as the first Devourer ship died, not just damaged or disabled but completely obliterated by human weapons. The massive vessel simply came apart, its hull dissolving into component atoms as containment fields failed and exotic matter reactions went critical. Admiral ZEC-THYSS is requesting an update, Wu reported from the communications station. Tell the Admiral that first contact is proceeding as expected, Morrison replied, never taking her eyes off the tactical display. The Devourers are proving to be somewhat less invincible than advertised. But, even as she spoke, Morrison could see the enemy fleet adapting to human tactics. The remaining Devourer ships were altering their formations, bringing different weapon systems to bear. More concerning, they were beginning to coordinate their attacks with a precision that spoke of hive mind intelligence. Energy signatures are changing, Park warned. They're modulating their drain beams, trying to find a frequency that can penetrate our bio-isolation systems. Let them try, Morrison growled. Rodriguez, how are our defensive systems holding up? Better than expected, the engineer replied. The bio-isolation fields are actually getting stronger as they interact with the Devourer energy attacks. It's almost like our systems are learning to adapt to their frequency modulations. Morrison nodded grimly. Human defensive technology was based on centuries of fighting wars against other humans, beings who were constantly trying to find new ways to kill each other. Their systems were designed to adapt and evolve during combat, becoming more effective the longer an engagement continued. The second wave of Devourer attacks was more coordinated than the first, with dozens of ships focusing their energy beams on individual human vessels. The concentrated assault was enough to overwhelm the shields of the UES Vengeance, and Morrison watched in horror as green fire began eating through the dreadnought's hull. Vengeance is reporting critical damage, Wu announced. They're losing hull integrity on multiple decks. Morrison was about to order a rescue operation when something impossible happened. The Vengeance didn't retreat or call for assistance. Instead, the damaged dreadnought accelerated directly toward the enemy formation, its remaining weapons blazing as it charged into the heart of the Devourer fleet. What the hell is Captain Rodriguez doing? Park muttered, but Morrison already knew. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the Vengeance was doing what human champions did when faced with impossible odds. She was turning her defeat into victory through sheer bloody-minded determination. Her ship might be dying, but she was going to make sure it took as many enemies with it as possible. The Vengeance struck the leading Devourer vessel at nearly 10% of light speed, its massive bulk tearing through enemy armor like tissue paper. The impact triggered a chain reaction that consumed both ships in a fireball visible from 100 light-years away. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. Her ship's death throes triggered every explosive device on board, creating a secondary detonation that crippled 3 more Devourer vessels. Holy hell, Park whispered, staring at the tactical display. She took out 4 of them. 4 capital ships with a single ramming attack. Morrison felt a surge of pride mixed with grief. Elena Rodriguez had been one of humanity's finest champions, a warrior who had never lost a battle in 15 years of service. Now she was gone, along with her 1,000-person crew. But her sacrifice had demonstrated something crucial to both the human fleet and their enemies. Humans didn't just die. They died in ways that killed other people. Signal from Admiral ZEC-THYSS, Wu reported. He's asking if we require immediate assistance. Tell the Admiral that the situation is well in hand, Morrison replied, her voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "And tell him that the Devourers have just learned their first lesson about human warfare."
"Which lesson is that?"
Park asked. Morrison smiled, and her expression would have terrified most galactic species.
"That when you kill a human, you better make damn sure you kill all of them. Because the ones you miss tend to get upset."
The Devourer fleet was adapting again, spreading their formation to minimize the effectiveness of ramming attacks. But they were also showing signs of something that Morrison had never expected to see from an ancient species of cosmic horrors: uncertainty. Their attack patterns were becoming more cautious, more defensive.
They were beginning to treat the human fleet as a genuine threat rather than simple prey.
"New contacts," Park announced suddenly.
"We've got Devourer reinforcements dropping out of hyperspace. Looks like they're calling for backup."
Morrison studied the new arrivals with professional interest. The reinforcement fleet was even larger than the first wave, nearly 500 vessels of various sizes, including several massive command ships that dwarfed anything they'd encountered so far.
"Seems we've gotten their attention," she observed. "Good. About time someone taught these things that the galaxy isn't their personal buffet." "Captain," Wu reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy fleet.
It's on standard galactic frequencies, but the message is unusual."
"Put it through," Morrison commanded.
The main screen flickered, and, suddenly, they were looking at something that defied description. The being on screen was vaguely humanoid but wrong in ways that made the human brain rebel against processing what it was seeing. Its flesh seemed to shift and flow like liquid, and its eyes were black voids that seemed to drain light from the universe. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of dying stars and the screams of consumed worlds. "Biological entities," it said, and the translation software struggled to convert concepts that had no equivalent in any known language.
"You resist consumption. This is unexpected. We offer you the honor of quick death rather than the slow consumption we had planned."
Morrison stood up from her command chair, and every champion on the bridge could feel the fury radiating from their captain like heat from a forge. "Unknown vessel," she replied, her voice carrying across space with icy precision. "This is Captain Sarah Morrison of the United Earthship Relentless. We are representatives of humanity, and we're here to deliver a message from the people of Earth and the Galactic Council." The Devourer creature tilted its head, the gesture somehow obscene when performed by something that wasn't quite alive in any recognizable sense.
"Speak your message, biological.
We will consider it while we decide how slowly to consume your species." Morrison smiled, and her expression was a promise of violence that transcended species barriers.
"The message is simple," she said.
You picked the wrong galaxy.
You want to consume biological life? You want to drain the essence of entire civilizations? Fine. But first you have to get through us.
And we're humans, which means we're really good at killing things that try to kill us. The Devourer entity was silent for a moment, and, when it spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been confusion.
You speak of resistance as if it were possible.
We have consumed 17 star systems. We have drained the life force of billions.
No biological entity can stand against our hunger.
Buddy,
Morrison replied, you've never met a human before, have you?
We're the species that looked at the food chain and decided we belonged at the top of it. We're the ones who turned warfare into an art form and survival into a religion.
You think you're scary because you eat planets?
She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with predatory anticipation. Wait until you see what we do to things that threaten our friends. The transmission cut off abruptly, and Morrison could see the enemy fleet beginning to move into attack formation. But something had changed. The Devourers were no longer approaching with the casual confidence of apex predators hunting helpless prey. They were moving like creatures that had suddenly realized they might be the ones being hunted. All ships, Morrison commanded, opening a channel to the entire human fleet. This is relentless actual. The enemy has just made the mistake of offering us a quick death instead of a slow one. I think they're trying to be merciful. She paused, letting her words carry to every champion in the fleet.
Show them what we think of mercy.
The response was immediate and overwhelming. 50 dreadnoughts opened fire simultaneously, unleashing a barrage of destruction that turned the space between the fleets into a hellscape of energy and exploding matter. Human weapons, designed by a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing, carved through devourer formations like scythes through wheat. But the devourers fought back with the desperation of creatures that were beginning to understand what they were facing. Energy beams capable of draining the life force from entire worlds lashed out at the human ships, while exotic weapons that violated the known laws of physics tore at the fabric of spacetime itself. Morrison watched her fleet take damage, watched good ships and better champions die in explosions that lit up the cosmos. But she also watched the devourers die, and she saw something in their movements that filled her with savage satisfaction. For the first time in their existence, the ancient cosmic horrors were afraid. They had encountered humanity, and they were learning the lesson that every enemy of the human race eventually learned. When you threaten the things humans protect, they don't just fight back. They fight back with interest. Champion First Class Marcus Ghostchen materialized inside the Devourer command vessel like death itself, his stealth suit flickering back to visibility as he emerged from the quantum tunnel his team had carved through the enemy's hull. Around him, 9 other human champions appeared from nowhere, their weapons already tracking toward targets that should have been impossible to reach. The interior of the Devourer's ship was a nightmare of organic technology and twisted architecture. The walls pulsed with veins of green energy, and the air itself seemed thick with malevolent presence. But Chen had grown up in the deep tunnels beneath Mars Colony, where the atmospheric processors sometimes failed and the darkness was filled with things that hunted human children. This was just another dark place filled with things that needed killing. Perimeter secured, reported Specialist Sarah Kim, her voice coming through the team's neural link as she swept the immediate area with sensors that could detect life signs through solid matter. No immediate hostiles, but I'm reading massive bioenergy signatures throughout the ship.
These things are definitely not using conventional technology. Chen nodded, checking his own readings.
The Devourer vessel was enormous, nearly 3 kilometers long and packed with systems that seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics.
But size had never intimidated humans. If anything, it just meant there was more to destroy. Remember the mission parameters, he sub-vocalized to his team. We're not here to hold territory or capture prisoners. We're here to find their central processing core and introduce it to some good old-fashioned human explosives. The team moved through the ship's corridors with the fluid precision of predators who had trained together for years. Each champion carried enough firepower to level a city block, along with specialized equipment designed for exactly this kind of penetration mission. Their armor was proof against energy weapons that could vaporize steel, and their bodies had been conditioned to function in environments that would kill most biological entities within seconds. Behind them, the battle between the human fleet and the Devourer armada continued to rage. Captain Morrison's ships were outnumbered 3-1, but they were holding their own through sheer tactical brilliance and the kind of stubborn determination that had made humanity the galaxy's premier warriors. Every few minutes, the entire ship would shudder as weapons capable of destroying planets were fired at distances measured in light seconds. "Ghost, we've got movement," warned Corporal David Park from his position at the rear of the formation. "Multiple contacts converging on our position from 3 different directions. Whatever they are, they're big." Chen smiled beneath his helmet's faceplate.
After 6 hours of ship-to-ship combat, the Devourers had finally figured out that humans weren't content to fight at long range. They were sending their defenders to deal with the boarding parties that had infiltrated their vessels throughout the fleet. "Contact in 30 seconds, Kim reported, her sensors painting detailed tactical displays inside each champion's helmet. I'm reading energy signatures that don't match any known biological forms. These things are different." The first Devourer emerged from a side passage like something from humanity's darkest nightmares. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its form a constantly shifting mass of what appeared to be living darkness shot through with veins of sickly green energy. When it moved, reality seemed to bend around it, and the temperature in the corridor dropped by 20 degrees.
Chen didn't hesitate.
His plasma rifle spoke first, sending a bolt of contained starfire directly into the creature's center mass. The shot that should have vaporized anything organic passed harmlessly through the Devourer's form, causing only a slight disruption in its energy patterns. "Standard weapons are ineffective," he reported calmly, even as the creature began to move toward them with predatory intent.
Switching to exotic ammunition.
The second shot from Chen's rifle carried a payload that had been developed specifically for this mission, projectiles infused with quantum disruptors that could affect matter on a subatomic level. This time, the Devourer screamed as portions of its form simply ceased to exist, deleted from reality by weapons that attacked the fundamental forces holding matter together. The creature's death cry was answered by dozens of similar sounds from throughout the ship. More Devourers were coming, and they were bringing friends. Multiple hostiles incoming, Park warned, his heavy weapons spinning up to full power.
Looks like we've stirred up the hornet's nest. The battle that followed would have been impossible by any conventional military standard.
Humans with weapons that violated the known laws of physics fought creatures that existed partially outside normal spacetime, in corridors where gravity changed direction without warning, and the walls themselves tried to drain the life force from anything that touched them. But Chen's team had trained for exactly this kind of impossible situation. They moved through the ship like dancers performing a deadly ballet, each champion covering the others while they advanced toward their objective.
When conventional tactics failed, they improvised. When their weapons proved inadequate, they adapted.
When the enemy tried to overwhelm them with numbers, they demonstrated the kind of creative violence that had made humanity the galaxy's most feared warriors.
Door sealed with energy locks, reported Specialist Torres from the team's forward position. The control mechanisms are integrated into the ship's biomatrix. I can't hack them with conventional methods.
Stand back, Chen ordered, moving to the barrier that blocked their path to the ship's central core. The door was a masterwork of alien technology, its surface covered with energy patterns that shifted and flowed like living things. It would have taken most species days to decode the security systems.
Chen solved the problem by placing a shaped charge against the door and stepping back.
The explosion that followed vaporized 20 meters of corridor and created a hole large enough for his team to advance through. Beyond the ruined barrier, they could see the Devourer ship's central command chamber, a vast space filled with organic computers that pulsed with malevolent intelligence. "Jesus," whispered Kim, staring at the sight through her helmet's sensors. "It's beautiful." The command chamber was indeed beautiful, in the way that toxic flowers and predatory creatures could be beautiful. Streams of energy flowed through crystalline structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human perception could process. The entire space hummed with power that made the hair on the back of Chen's neck stand up despite his armor's environmental systems. At the center of it all was something that Chen's brain struggled to categorize. It was part machine, part organism, part something else entirely, a fusion of technology and biology that represented millions of years of evolution dedicated to a single purpose:
the consumption and processing of biological life on a galactic scale.
Target acquired, Chen reported to his team and to the fleet beyond.
Beginning placement of demolition charges.
But even as he moved toward the central processing core, Chen could feel something changing around them. The ship's biosystems were responding to their presence, and the very walls seemed to be coming alive with hostile intent. Energy patterns that had been passive moments before now pulsed with predatory awareness, and the temperature began to rise as the ship's defensive systems came online.
"Ghost, we've got problems," Park warned.
"The ship's immune system is activating.
It's trying to digest us."
Chen looked around at the organic walls that were beginning to secrete substances that his armor's sensors identified as extremely corrosive acids. The Devourer vessel was attempting to dissolve the human boarding party like antibodies attacking an infection.
"Accelerate the timeline," he ordered.
"Torres, Kim, start placing charges on the secondary processing nodes."
"Park, Rodriguez, watch R6. Everything else in this room is about to become very unhappy with our presence."
The team moved with the efficiency of a machine designed for destruction. Each champion carried enough explosive devices to level a small city, and they deployed them with the precision of artists creating a masterpiece. Every charge was placed for maximum effect, positioned to create cascading failures that would tear the ship apart from the inside. But the Devourer vessel wasn't content to die passively. As the humans worked, the ship's defenses became increasingly aggressive. Energy beams lashed out from hidden emplacements, trying to disintegrate the champions before they could complete their mission. The walls themselves began to reshape,
trying to trap or crush the intruders.
Charges set, reported Torres, his voice strained from the effort of working while under constant attack.
30 seconds to detonation.
Time to leave, Chen announced, but even as he spoke, he could see that their exit route was being systematically sealed by the ship's defensive systems. The Devourer vessel had learned enough about human tactics to realize that preventing escape was the key to stopping their mission. Exit routes compromised, Kim reported grimly.
We're locked in. Chen nodded calmly.
He had known this was a possibility from the moment they'd volunteered for the mission. Boarding a Devourer command vessel was essentially a suicide mission, and every member of his team had accepted that fact before they'd ever set foot in the transport pods. "Well," he said, activating the final countdown sequence, "looks like we're taking the express route out of here."
Everyone remember their jump training?
The team exchanged glances through their helmet displays, and Chen could see the same grim determination in every face. They were human champions, selected from billions of candidates for their absolute refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. If they were going to die, they were going to die in a way that accomplished their mission.
15 seconds to detonation, Torres announced. All charges armed and ready. Signal Captain Morrison, Chen ordered.
Tell her the package is delivered and she should probably back her ships away from this particular piece of space.
The final seconds ticked away with agonizing precision.
Around them, the Devourer ship's defenses reached a crescendo of fury, energy beams and acid sprays filling the air with lethal intent. But the human champions stood their ground, weapons ready, facing death with the same calm professionalism they had brought to every battle of their careers.
5 seconds, Torres counted down. 4. 3.
2. The explosion that consumed the Devourer command vessel was visible from Admiral HFY's flagship 30 light-years away. The ship's central core detonated with the force of a small star-going supernova, and the resulting chain reaction tore through the vessel's biosystems like wildfire through dry grass.
Within seconds, 3 kilometers of alien technology that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia simply ceased to exist.
But Chen's team wasn't finished. Even as their primary charges destroyed the command vessel, similar explosions began erupting throughout the Devourer fleet. Human boarding parties had infiltrated dozens of enemy ships simultaneously, and they were all completing their missions with the same deadly efficiency. Captain Morrison watched from the bridge of the Relentless as enemy vessels began dying throughout the enemy formation. Each explosion represented the sacrifice of 10 human champions, warriors who had given their lives to eliminate threats to biological life throughout the galaxy. "Confirm target destruction," she ordered, her voice heavy with the weight of command decisions that cost lives. "Confirmed," reported Park from the tactical station.
"We're showing total systems failure across 47 enemy vessels. Secondary explosions are spreading throughout their formation." Morrison nodded grimly.
The boarding actions had been devastatingly effective, but the cost had been enormous. Nearly 500 champions had died in the space of 30 minutes, each one taking an enemy capital ship with them. It was the kind of tactical exchange that no other species would have considered acceptable. But humans had always been willing to pay prices that other species found incomprehensible. "Signal from Admiral HFY, reported Wu from her communications station.
He's requesting a status update on the boarding operations."
"Tell the Admiral that the first phase of the engagement has been completed successfully," Morrison replied.
"Enemy fleet strength has been reduced by approximately 60%. We're preparing to begin Phase 2 operations." "Phase 2?
Wu asked, confused. "Captain, the tactical briefing only included." Morrison's smile was sharp enough to cut steel.
"The tactical briefing was for galactic consumption, Wu. Phase 2 is what we call advanced human problem-solving techniques."
On the main tactical display, the remaining Devourer vessels were already beginning to retreat, their formation breaking apart as ship after ship fell to human boarding parties.
But Morrison wasn't content to let them escape.
The enemy had made the mistake of threatening innocent life, and humans had very strong feelings about creatures that preyed on the helpless.
"Signal the fleet," she commanded. "All ships, pursue and destroy.
No survivors, no escapes, no mercy.
We're going hunting."
The human dreadnoughts surged forward like wolves scenting blood, their engines pushing them to velocities that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. They weren't content to simply defeat the Devourer fleet, they were going to exterminate it completely. Because that was what human champions did when faced with cosmic horrors. They turned the monsters into the prey. Admiral ZEC-THYSS stood in the observation lounge of his flagship, staring out at the debris field that had once been the largest Devourer fleet seen in galactic history. The battle was over. After 6 days of continuous combat that had raged across 3 star systems, the ancient cosmic horrors that had terrorized civilizations for millennia had been completely destroyed.
Not defeated. Not driven off. Destroyed.
Every single Devourer vessel had been hunted down and obliterated by human champions who had pursued them through hyperspace, normal space, and dimensional rifts that shouldn't have been survivable. The humans had followed their enemies into the very heart of whatever nightmare dimension they had called home, and they had burned it all to ash. The cost had been staggering. Of the 50 dreadnoughts that had engaged the enemy, only 12 remained operational. 38 ships and 38,000 human champions had been lost in a campaign that military historians would later call the most decisive victory in galactic history. But the numbers didn't capture the reality of what ZEC-THYSS had witnessed: warriors who had fought impossible odds and won through sheer determination to protect life throughout the galaxy. "Admiral," his aide announced, "the human delegation has arrived." ZEC-THYSS turned to see Captain Morrison entering the lounge, flanked by 2 of her surviving officers. The human commander looked exactly as she had at the beginning of the campaign: calm, professional, and utterly unbreakable. But there were new lines around her eyes, and her movements carried the weight of decisions that had cost thousands of lives.
"Captain Morrison," ZEC-THYSS greeted her formally. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to express our gratitude for humanity's sacrifice. Your actions have saved billions of lives across dozens of star systems."
Morrison nodded acknowledgement, but her expression remained neutral.
"Thank you, Admiral. My champions did what they volunteered to do. The galaxy is safer because of their sacrifice." "I've been reviewing the tactical reports," ZEC-THYSS continued, activating a holographic display that showed the final stages of the battle. "Your pursuit of the fleeing Devourer forces through 11 different dimensional barriers, that level of determination is unprecedented in galactic military history." "The enemy made a mistake," Morrison replied simply. "They thought they could run away and regroup somewhere safe. They forgot that humans are persistence hunters. Once we start chasing something, we don't stop until it's dead." ZEC-THYSS studied the human commander with fascination. She had just completed the most difficult military campaign in recorded history, losing nearly 80% of her forces in the process. Yet she spoke of it as if it were simply another day at the office. "Captain, I must ask, how do you process losses of this magnitude?" "By any conventional measure, this campaign should be considered a Pyrrhic victory at best." Morrison was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the debris field visible through the observation windows. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Admiral, every champion who died in this campaign volunteered for the mission knowing they probably wouldn't come home. They did it anyway because they understood what was at stake. The Devourers weren't just threatening a few star systems, they were threatening the continued existence of biological life in this galaxy." She gestured toward the wreckage of the enemy fleet. Those creatures had consumed entire civilizations. They had turned trillions of living beings into fuel for their war machines. They were a cancer that would have spread until there was nothing left but death and darkness. Morrison turned to face ZEC-THYSS directly, her eyes reflecting a depth of purpose that made the old admiral step back involuntarily. 38,000 humans died to make sure that never happened again. They died protecting species they had never met, on worlds they had never seen, for people who might not even remember their names. And they did it gladly, because that's what champions do. ZEC-THYSS was silent for a long moment, processing the implications of what Morrison was saying. The human military wasn't driven by conquest or glory or even survival. It was motivated by something far more dangerous: an absolute commitment to protecting innocent life, regardless of the cost.
The Council has been debating the implications of this victory, he admitted.
Some representatives are concerned about humanity's military capabilities.
They're worried about what a species capable of this level of destruction might do if turned against galactic civilization. Morrison's smile was cold enough to freeze hydrogen. Admiral, humanity has been capable of destroying entire star systems for centuries.
We've had weapons that could sterilize planets since before we achieved faster-than-light travel.
The fact that we've never used them against another species should tell you everything you need to know about our intentions. She moved to the observation window, looking out at the drifting wreckage of ships that had once seemed invincible.
We don't fight to conquer. We don't fight for resources or territory or political advantage. We fight to protect. And, when something threatens the innocent, we fight until that threat is completely eliminated, regardless of the cost to ourselves.
But, surely there must be limits, ZTHYSS protested. No species can sustain losses like these indefinitely. Morrison turned back to him, and her expression was utterly serene. Admiral, Earth has a population of nearly 50 billion humans.
Our colonies throughout the Sol system add another 20 billion.
If necessary, we could have fielded 500 dreadnoughts instead of 50. We could have sent 500,000 champions instead of 50,000.
The implications hit ZTHYSS like a physical blow.
The human fleet that had just annihilated the Devourer Armada represented less than 1% of Earth's military potential. They had achieved total victory while holding more than 99% of their forces in reserve.
But why, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why hold back? Why accept higher casualties when you could have overwhelmed the enemy with superior numbers? Morrison's answer was simple and terrifying in its implications. Because we wanted to see what they were capable of.
The next time we encounter cosmic horrors, we'll know exactly what it takes to kill them.
Our champions learned valuable lessons fighting the Devourers, lessons that will save lives in future conflicts. She gestured toward the tactical display still showing the final battle sequences. Every engagement was recorded and analyzed. Every weapon effectiveness rating was documented. Every tactical innovation was catalogued. When the next threat emerges, and there will be a next threat, humanity will be ready.
ZTHYSS realized he was looking at something unprecedented in galactic history, a military force that treated genocidal cosmic horrors as training opportunities. The humans hadn't just defeated the Devourers, they had used the campaign to test and refine their military capabilities for future conflicts.
There's something else you should know, Morrison continued, her tone becoming even more serious.
The dimensional barriers the Devourers used to retreat weren't just hiding places. They were gateways to other realities, other universes where similar threats might exist. She activated her own holographic display, showing sensor readings from the final pursuit operations.
My champions followed the enemy through 17 different dimensional rifts. In 12 of those alternate realities, we found evidence of other Devourer fleets, other cosmic horrors that pose similar threats to biological life. Her smile was sharp enough to cut diamond. We've taken the liberty of sterilizing them as well.
The silence that followed was profound.
ZTHYSS stared at the sensor data, trying to process what Morrison was telling him.
The humans hadn't just eliminated one threat, they had conducted a multidimensional extermination campaign that had wiped out cosmic horrors across multiple universes.
How many? He asked weakly. Total enemy casualties across all dimensional theaters?
Morrison consulted her datapad. Approximately 47,000 Devourer-class vessels, plus supporting fleets and infrastructure.
We estimate that we've eliminated roughly 80% of the total threat. 80%, ZTHYSS repeated numbly. What about the other 20%?
Morrison's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested that the remaining threats had already been marked for termination. The dimensional rifts have been mapped and catalogued.
Follow-up operations are scheduled for next quarter. We're planning a more comprehensive approach for the remaining threats, possibly using our new Apocalypse-class vessels.
Apocalypse-class?
ZTHYSS had to ask.
Dreadnoughts were designed for fighting conventional enemies, Morrison explained matter-of-factly.
Apocalypse-class ships are specifically intended for exterminating cosmic horrors and other existential threats to galactic civilization. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy a small galaxy. ZTHYSS felt his world shift beneath him. He had thought the dreadnoughts were the pinnacle of human military technology. Now he was learning that they were simply the opening act. How many of these apocalypse ships do you plan to build?
As many as necessary, Morrison replied without hesitation.
Humanity takes the protection of biological life very seriously, Admiral. We're